Welcome to the Stiles Council, a podcast all about the England football team. I'm Chris Nee, and my co-host is David Hartrick, England supporter. Hello, Dave.
Hello there, I am indeed an England supporter.
A fountain-bothering England supporter.
Yeah, hashtag face paint, hashtag fountain.
Excellent work. We'll get straight into the news this week before we go on to our main topic, which kind of leads into something we'll talk about in a couple of weeks as well. The FA has kept itself busy, or has been kept busy. Martin Glenn has... Well, Dave, Poppygate's come a long way since I wrote about it in the original incarnation of the Stiles Council all those years ago. Since that point, the FA has stood up for its right to display the poppy, along with some of the other home nations' FAs, and therefore has been somewhat compromised in its position on Manchester City coach Pep Guardiola, whom they've charged for repeatedly wearing a yellow ribbon in support of imprisoned Catalonian separatists. Already a bit awkward, Dave, that, isn't it, before we get into the aftermath?
Yeah. This whole thing is going to be a test of our decision to try and make this a swear-free podcast, basically. It's just the FA... The problem with the FA is they are forever shooting themselves in the foot. This, when you've got an issue like this where there's lots of sides to it, so you can look at Pep as an island and say, should he be doing it, yes or no? You can then expand that island to include, is Pep hypocritical, bear in mind Man City's dodgy ownership. Then you bring the FA angle into it. Where do we stand on how the FA feel about it? And then you bring in Mr. Glenn's... how shall we describe his comments, Chris?
Well, considering he's the chief executive of the Football Association, it reflects badly on him that I would describe it as returning his foot to his mouth.
And that is perhaps the single most charitable thing I've ever heard you say.
Well, swear free. So let's move on to his comments. He's pointed out that no religious or political symbols are welcome on display upon one's footballing person. Yeah. And the examples he gave were partly the problem that he created for himself, but also slightly bizarre, because obviously the poppy wasn't listed, and I'll be damned if we ever go into Poppygate in detail on this show. And then he listed the Star of David and the swastika, clearly going to cause issues for himself and for the FA with those two. And then Robert Mugabe.
Yeah.
Not his logo, not a picture of his face, just Robert Mugabe.
I mean,
who isn't carrying Robert Mugabe around at a football match?
My initial instinct there, and some people may think that's incredibly trivial, but my initial instinct there was just to laugh, because it is such a laughable thing to say. It is... From one of these things to the other is just such a massive leap, isn't it? From the Star of David to a swastika to Robert Mugabe is just... I can't get my head round the thought process. I really can't. And I know there is the argument that this was a phone conversation, etc., etc., but no, understand your position. Understand your role. Understand your job. It staggers me. It absolutely staggers me. And again, I hate to mention this again as I have on other podcasts, but me and Chris do another podcast, which you may have listened to, called The Football Fives. You know my continual, eternal point about getting footballers in charge in roles in the FA and people who are just out of the game, Rio Ferdinand, Frank Lampard, etc.
Yeah.
We need what I can only describe as modern thinking, because middle-aged white men is not working. Upper middle-aged white men, I should say, is not working. We have to try something else, because, like you say, it's just foot-in-mouth syndrome. And it's not, Chris, it's not even the first time, is it? This is the criminal thing.
This is Prince Philip.
Yeah, it's anybody can make a mistake, but it's not even the first time, and we're not even talking about incidents that are a decade apart. It's just it staggers me. It absolutely staggers me.
Yeah, it smacks, I think, of desperate spinning of wheels in a situation that goes way back to the FA's own actions over other symbols, doesn't it? It's trying to distinguish what they did, but to lump Guardiola's choice in, which for me is a valid debate. I don't think that we should just assume that he's correct to wear that. But Glenn's association of that with, or packaging of that up with, the Star of David, which frankly is, very different to a political and religious symbol. It may well be both. It's certainly at least one of them. But it's also, if I'm not mistaken, on the flag of a UEFA footballing country.
Yeah. But this is what I mean. This is why I can't understand the thought process to leap from that to a swastika.
Bizarre.
Which is, I mean, let's be honest. There's no, you can't pastiche a swastika. A swastika is a symbol of evil. And I know people will say, oh yeah, but it's a Hindu symbol and it means this, that and the other. No, I'm sorry, wider public conscious, there is only one thing you can associate with a swastika. So to leap from a Star of David to what is perhaps the most recognisable ultimate symbol of evil, to then jump to Robert Mugabe, I mean, I'm laughing again, because I can't see the synapses that fire together to put that chain in line. If I was Homer Simpson, it would just say resigned sigh in my script.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a big stink. There was a little apology, and we all move on. So I think we should do the same. Move on to another little piece of news, which is very quickly not England related, and that is the decision of Manchester United youngster Scot McTominay to play for Scotland in his international football career. He's been getting plenty of playing time lately, Dave. He's getting some pretty decent reviews. I don't know anything about him other than who he plays for and that he was born in Lancaster. Have you seen much of him at all?
Yeah. I've seen him, I think I've seen him now 4 times.
Yeah? Rating him?
Listen, this is not sort of influenced by his decision to pick Scotland, but I don't really see anything other than, a reasonably functional midfielder. I think he's a good player. I think his development's quite interesting. If you look, he's already come back from quite a bad injury. He's obviously got a lot of mental strength to come into the situation he has and do well. And I see him longer term as he could well be a useful squad player for United. But United go out and buy a midfielder in the summer that plays in that position, don't they? They're not going to buy. They're not going to spend 35 million on Sarri or Verratti or whoever because they've got McTominay. I think I can actually understand his decision to play for Scotland. It's a highly personal decision, and there seems to be some familial reasons, and obviously he wants to get in and improve that Scotland side, who are in it's the worst Scotland side of my living memory, and I actually remember some quite good Scotland sides. So I can understand the decision, but I really can't get too upset about it. Who knows? He may go and prove me wrong and move to Real Madrid for 150 million quid. But he just looks like if I was going to be slightly cruel, I would say he just looks like a younger Darren Fletcher without meaning to do either player down, because I think Darren Fletcher is a good player, but he that's what he looks like to me.
It's been fascinating to watch the fallout from this as well, because obviously sensible people look at it and think, fair enough, or don't care, or that might be a shame. But because of the way the media works in this country, we obviously have to have the full range of reactions from former players. Charlie Nicholas has quickly made the most critical of the comments, I think, saying he's made the wrong decision. Joey Barton has accused him of not wanting the pressure of playing for England, which is, the go-to opinion for anybody who pretends to care about a player who's decided this before they even get capped. Obviously before they get capped, but before they get into any kind of interesting prospect of international football. And said he wants his summers off, which I should dig. And Gordon McQueen reckons he's the new Scott Brown, the poor lad. Nobody wants to be the new Scott Brown, do they?
No, but I in that range of people who you've just quite rightly pointed out have offered their opinion, there's at least a minimum of one that I happen to think is an absolute parcel of a bloke. So I wouldn't, if I was McTominay, I would ignore people telling me I made the wrong decision. I just, the problem is that it's always framed, whenever somebody does this, it's always framed as they've rejected England. They haven't rejected England, they've picked Scotland. And there is a difference.
Know why. It's just such nonsense. Because how do we know that he doesn't just consider himself Scottish and always has?
Yeah, exactly.
Why wouldn't he play for Scotland in that case? As far as I can tell, he's had no association with the English FA whatsoever.
Yeah, and this Scotland is not Jack Charlton's Republic of Ireland. He will have to have, he will have to qualify properly, which he obviously does, and he obviously wants to see through. And I think fair play to him. What I actually quite like that he's done is nailed those colours to the mast right now. And it's not been dragged out and will he, won't he, and he's not been sort of forced to answer a question if he gets picked for a squad further down the line. I think fair play to him. Fair play to him.
I think Jose Mourinho has pushed for him to get a call as well, hasn't he? So it seems like the wheels are in motion, and I think he's certainly not a Premier League regular at this point, but he's someone that a team of the quality that Alex McLeish has at his disposal at the moment will be looking at him.
But I mean, rather typically, the week we're recording this, he played at the weekend. Well, he played Monday night, and he had a bit of a stinker. So he's very raw. He's very, but I mean, you're right. He will improve that Scotland squad, I would imagine. So
eventually,
fair enough. Just can't get myself worked up about it.
We're slightly being hypocritical about it because my main view on it is it's up to him.
Yeah.
Why does anyone care? So let's not talk about it any further. Our main topic this week is something from days of the past. We're going to have a quick chat about England's goalkeepers in the 1990s. England goalkeeper is a thing in my football experience, and the 1990s is something that both you and I, Dave, have huge fond memories of. Mm-hmm. We want to kind of segue this in the next show into a bit of a chat about who starts in goal for England at the World Cup in Russia this summer. But going for the rewind first, let's start with a list, Dave, in order of the first 1990s starting lineup appearance for these goalkeepers. We have Peter Shilton, we have Chris Woods, David Seaman, Nigel Martin, Tim Flowers, Ian Walker, and David James. Now, we'll get the first one out of the way quickly. Peter Shilton, 20-year England career, ended at the very start of the decade. It looked like it was over in Italy, didn't it?
Yeah, and yet he was still named best keeper at the tournament. So the thing about the thing about Italy was that it finished. He was absolutely brilliant until the semi-final, where he was obviously terrible in the penalties. The deflected goal, he just looked like he didn't have the mobility to get back, and and a younger keeper might well have kept that out. And then, of course, the mistake in the third place playoff against Italy in his final game. So, yeah, but it should not be understated how good Shilton was and so consistent as well. And very much from the Shay Given frame of having to do an awful lot of work to get across his goal constantly. Yeah, brilliant keeper.
Yeah, and right up to Cameroon and Belgium.
Yes, yeah.
So Chris Woods has a special place in my football history because he was the England goalkeeper when I first really knew what an England goalkeeper was. And he was very much the guy under Graham Taylor. But he shared his duties with David Seaman way back in the early 90s, and the pair of them picked up caps fairly regularly. And Seaman was kind of a regular first choice a while before I think of him as being a regular first choice.
Yeah.
You were a bit older than me, Dave. What was the competition between the two of those like? Because I remember Chris Woods, unfortunately and unfairly, largely for one or two goals that I feel he could have done better on.
Yeah. Chris Woods was basically Graham Taylor's number one, really. But he was a tremendously unlucky keeper with everything from injuries to circumstance. And he never... It's hard to describe, but despite getting 43 caps, he never at any point felt like England's number one. It always felt like there was somebody who was better than him who couldn't play for whatever reason. So
yeah, I really felt so. I've went back and had a quick look at this stuff. In my memory, it went Shilton for ages, Woods for a bit, and then a bit of a mess, and then Seaman. And it's way earlier than that for Seaman.
Yeah, and Seaman was such a promising. I mean, I remember Seaman's first game, which was, I remember it because it was an extraordinary game. It was get this, Chris. RFA was money grabbing. Can you believe that? Back.
The Football Association.
Yeah, incredible. Way back in 1988 when we played this pointless friendly against Saudi Arabia it was just purely, we were paid a shed load of money to go out there. It was played at virtually midday in Saudi Arabia with a bit of a scratch squad, and we drew 1-1. Saudi Arabia's goal, if you ever look it up, it's an absolute screamer. Paul Gascoigne mistake on a really bobbly pitch. Tries to play the ball back to, I can't remember which defender it is. And it bobbles up and a lad runs on and just volleys in an absolute screamer. But we ended up with a 1-1 draw, and that was Seaman's first game in 1988. Now, when you consider his last cap was in 2002, that is... it's not a Lothar Matthäus international career span, but it is big. It is big. To take in 3 decades is impressive, very impressive. And the thing about
this was the Saudi Arabia game where Sir Bobby took a kick in afterwards, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. I mean, for one of the headlines was "For the love of Allah, please go." I mean, can you imagine? You imagine newspaper doing that now? But
no,
the thing about Seaman was that he was number 3 keeper for Italia 90. Broke his finger in the training camp before Stave Besant necked one in. But Seaman was always thought of as the best keeper. But he's a little bit. People forget with David Seaman, he was a little bit prone to form. His consistency for quite a while was a little bit up and down. And, even when he was at Arsenal, he would go through spells where he would struggle a little bit. And that's why the competition... I mean, we mentioned this off air. The competition in the 90s was strong. I mean, I don't want to sort of spoil it by leaping ahead in the list, but there was keepers that in any other decade, I would argue, would have got an awful lot more caps.
Well, let's jump to them, because for me, Tim Flowers and Nigel Martyn. So firstly, again, in my head, there's a spell in which Nigel Martyn was first choice for England for a bit, and really that just isn't true. The competition between Seaman and Flowers and Martyn, that is serious. You know, there's been periods of late where we've had Joe Hart being pushed by various second and third choice goalkeepers, and you know, you and I arguing frequently that some of those should be ahead of him in the pecking order. But we do not have Seaman, Flowers, Martyn.
Yeah. And
Nigel Martyn was a superb goalkeeper.
Oh, Nigel Martyn's reactions, you could argue, I mean, his distribution wasn't brilliant, and he was far from the total package, but his actual reactions, his actual shot stopping was phenomenal. And Tim Flowers' authority, his command of the area, if he was coming for a ball, he was coming for a ball, and if you were in the way, whether you were his teammate or not, he was ploughing through you.
You used to hear, maybe not at Wembley, but you used to hear him at the stadium at club matches.
Yeah. And to have, I think it's easy to, people will look back at this era who are Premier League years mad, and they will look at a Tim Flowers and they will immediately think Collymore goal where it hits the divot and goes in past him when he's in goal for Blackburn. And the thing about sort of media and Premier Leagues, etc., they boil down a lot of careers to a couple of incidents. Tim Flowers was a brilliant keeper, an unbelievable keeper. And if I had to sort of put him, if you had to make a modern day equivalent, if Tim Flowers was about, he would have started. How many caps has Joe Hart got? It's in its 70s, isn't he? He would have probably got about half of that. And I sincerely mean that. So to have Seaman, Martyn and Flowers competing at the same time in the same squads is just incredible when you look back. At some point, we will have this same discussion about England's central defenders in the late 90s and early 2000s, and it's a similar thing. It's
feature length.
It's one of those things that at the time you don't appreciate. You don't appreciate what we had. And the keeper I want to go on and talk about is, then you got Ian Walker, only picks up 4 England caps because of the competition around him. First one in 1996, last one in 2004. He's got a really iconic England moment, which is unfortunately Zola flashing that brilliant goal past him at Wembley. But another really, really good keeper. Really good keeper. The problem with Walker was he started to believe his own hype at one point, and he basically, over a season and a half, he sort of deteriorated to the point where his confidence was shot. But again, another brilliant young keeper.
Yeah, actually, the Glenn Hoddle spell is kind of interesting, because he went from there was 4 years without a first start for an England goalkeeper, for a New England goalkeeper, and then he started 2 new keepers within a month, and yet with those coming through, the other one being David James, he still kept David Seaman as his first choice, rightly, and he still used Flowers and Martyn a fair bit too, which is why until those players were out of the way, David James was he wasn't the 90s goalkeeper. He became the England goalkeeper later on than that. And Ian Walker was devoid of caps for basically every England international break that he was eligible for, pretty much.
It's just a complete lack of opportunity, isn't it? And we'll talk in depth at some point about David James. I have a lot of issue with David James. I never thought he was technically a very good keeper. He always looked to have huge gaps in his game to me. And David James shift his career forward by 5 years. He's not getting in ahead of Seaman, Martyn or Flowers, is he? No way.
No. And actually, when there was an overlap, he was really raw.
Yeah.
People probably don't remember it now because you look at this really imposing character who gives off the aura of being able to control his penalty area. Went off and did his American football stuff, and is very kind of eloquent and able to talk about the game as well. Not always someone that you would agree with on everything, but he, as a man, oozes confidence. Way back in the late 90s and early 2000s, he had a reputation for being a bit of a liability.
Well, Calamity James,
exactly.
But my problem with David James is that there was such a massive gap between his performances. So a really good David James performance to an average David James performance, there's like a massive gap between the two. And then an average performance to a bad performance, there's another massive gap. And it was always one of the three. So I just never felt he had the consistency that you would get out of a Martin or a Flowers. If I'm completely honest, I never thought he had the consistency he had out of an Ian Walker, really. But he wasn't a bad keeper, but he was, I mean, as you said, he was effectively kept out of first team action by David Seaman right up until when he retired. And, he retired from football fairly shortly afterwards, didn't he, David Seaman? Yeah. So, yeah. He was done and dusted, really. And then he became some of the competition David James had for his place. I mean, I'm going to say the words Richard Wright and just leave it at that, really.
Yeah, and let's leave it there completely as well, because we'll move on to our player wall to finish off the show this week. Dave, as the weeks go by, I'm less and less convinced that I will ever bother to turn this into anything physical, but it's still the intention. Basically, what will happen each show, Dave or I will come to the recording session with a nomination of an England figure, usually a player, not necessarily somebody who we're just saying was brilliant, someone with a story, someone who was interesting. You're up this week, Dave, and you've just gone for someone brilliant.
Yeah. There is a clutch of players who are untouchable in my memory and recollection in terms of my affections, and we did last time it was my turn. I did Owen Hargreaves, who is in that bracket. Time before we did God, Paul Gascoigne. This is another man who's well up there. After this, we'll be talking about players with stories, but for me, no one gets near Chris Waddle, really. The thing about Waddle was he got an awful lot of criticism when he was playing for England. And it largely came down to one thing, really, and that was his goal-scoring record, which, for Chris Waddle to get 6 goals in 62 England caps is quite mystifying, really, for a player who was so good in front of goal normally. But he was primarily a creator, and these were the days before such things as assists, etc., were celebrated, or, I mean, I can remember the coverage were even really noticed. And there's a hell of a lot of England goals between sort of 1986 and, I don't know, 1990 that you'll see a Waddle cross or a Waddle ball or Waddle involved very heavily throughout. And those England goals as well are really great 6 England goals. His first goal for England is one of my favourite England goals, which is in a game we absolutely shooed Turkey. He picks the ball up and just goes on this lovely run and just hits the ball right across the keeper. A goal completely enhanced by a fabulous Wembley camera angle. And yeah, he became... It's easy to sort of mock Waddle in lots of ways because of Diamond Lights, because of a slightly sombre media persona, it would be fair to say, as a pundit now, because of the mullet back in the day. He was utterly brilliant, Chris. I mean, he was, for a long period of time, he was on form, he was virtually unplayable, and he was brilliant for Spurs, absolutely loved and adored at Spurs, but he wanted to play abroad at the time when we were obviously mired in the European ban. Took the opportunity to go to Marseille for what was a hell of a lot of money at the time. Kept his place in the England team, and was, I mean, go to YouTube, I urge anyone, and put in Chris Waddle Marseille, and you will see just the sheer joy he took in playing. I mean, they loved him over there. They called him the Joker. And whole time he's got a smile on his face, scored some brilliant goals, nearly scored one of the best ever goals in the history of the European Cup against AC Milan, running the length of the pitch, and then just ran out of talent at the very end. But just utterly brilliant, utterly brilliant. I'm interested in your sort of recognition, because I'm guessing he was sort of just before your time, Chris Waddle.
Yeah, well, I feel privileged to have seen him at all, really. And I feel like I'm in a good spot with Chris Waddle, because he came back, obviously, and played for Sheffield Wednesday, which was when I got to experience these two things working in parallel, which was seeing Waddle playing in person and being brilliant, but also having this kind of second-hand knowledge, this aura, the Waddle myth, that he just seemed to just expand himself and just fulfill this aura every time you've seen him play. So all of the story of Waddle and the player he was wrapped up into the reality of seeing him play, and you know, not having any of the negatives of Newcastle or Spurs or Marseille at all. You know, he was brilliant there, and then I'm seeing him being brilliant as well. And he just seemed to be this larger than life person who did these amazing things. You know, I remember I think it was in Match magazine, and there was a feature about a free kick that he scored for Sheffield Wednesday, I think in the FA Cup. Did they have a semi-final against United? Sheffield United? They
had. It was one of the greatest. I mean, the goal. Yeah, I mean, I can remember this goal like it was yesterday, Chris. And basically, it's miles out, and it's over to the keeper's left-hand side of the box. He's not central. He takes a really long run up, and basically sort of side foots it from miles out, and it flies in. And this is in a FA Cup semi-final, played against Wembley, a Sheffield derby, no less. And it's just an incredible goal. Because of the Gaza goal, the Gaza FA Cup semi-final goal, and others, it sort of gets a little bit lost. And it's an incredible free kick. And when he came back to Sheffield Wednesday in the period you're talking about, he was out of the England side. And a lot of people were saying he was basically a busted flush. He'd done his time. He was too old at this point. And he was still, on his day, he was still tearing fullbacks apart like you wouldn't believe. And I'm not for a second saying that Waddle was good every single time he walked onto a football pitch. But the difference was, on his day, when he was on form, I don't think there was many better. He was unplayable. Consistency always a problem, but it's always a problem for any winger, because it's completely dependent on who you're up against and, you know, whether you actually get on the ball. But yeah, it's lovely to hear you sort of talk about that time without the sort of baggage of just being able to enjoy these moments. I mean, you've seen the Ryan Giggs Vine, I take it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really weird that he's come up at this point, because you know, banter Twitter has brought about a classic Waddle moment for us this week, which has caught a little bit of virality. Waddle putting Ryan Giggs on his arse twice in the same move is a real joy, and that's the Chris Waddle I am able to remember, because I don't have the kind of the 80s negatives. Well, not that, you know, the negatives that went with the positives. He wasn't like he had terrible spells, but I never saw him play badly in the 80s. I've only seen the good stuff from the 80s. So, it was kind of Waddle writ large, really, that Giggs moment, because he's the thing that I remember looking back and seeing him play for Sheffield Wednesday is this ability to just slow the game to a standstill and then beat his man, and he loved it. He loved to chop back onto his right foot, loved to drop his shoulder. He was able to do these things because he had such crossing ability on his left that there was no way to safely usher him in either direction.
He's one of the only footballers, one of the only wingers I've seen. There's a very select group that they can do all the tricks you want, but they can also beat a fullback just literally without touching the ball. Just something in the hips, the movement, the dip of the shoulder, and that's all it takes. And it's very, very few people can do that. Very, very few. And I mean, we would kill for a Waddle now. God, yeah. My memory sort of tricked me a little bit into thinking he was just an excellent winger, but YouTube has reminded me that he was a bit like Cantona in a sense, in that he was an all-round entertainer with this extraordinary level of ability and all the imagination in the world. There were little skills and flicks and tricks and plenty of end product, and not just on the wing. And it was just one of these players who would pop up, 30, 40 yards from goal and back heel a through ball like it was nothing. Yeah, he was a cracking player, gangly for a winger as well, which is always a pleasure. And also, he just loved playing. He was still playing in 2014. He was playing in amateur leagues around Sheffield. So just genuinely loves playing, having the ball at his feet. And I've got an awful lot of respect for that, as you know. Yep, and no better place to leave it, because that's all we've got time for this week. I am Chris M. Nee on Twitter. He's at David Hartrick. And you can follow Sphinx FTBL on Twitter and Facebook for other podcast bits and bobs and even more, hopefully, exciting football stuff to come. See you later.